So for whatever reason, Trump's attorneys wanted to sidestep all this and use Section 12406 of Title 10. Now, California, no surprise, Gavin Newsom, he filed a lawsuit to stop Trump from using the National Guard. Why? From a policy standpoint, if you're Gavin Newsom, why do you want to stop Trump? Is that political? Or if you say you were the governor of Wyoming and you were having riots, would you welcome the National Guard or no? What do you think?
I think it's a general dislike of anybody interfering with your own sovereignty, and that's what I was thinking when you talked about the different methods of enforcing this. I wonder if it was I'm not even going to use the general power that people usually look to. I'm going to use this.
Welcome to episode 74 of the Weekly Docket, the Silberman Law Firm podcast. Today is June 13th, 2025. I'm Phil Silberman, owner of the firm and your host. I'm joined by Chris Heald, who's our firm's supervising attorney. Chris, welcome back. I understand you just took the kids to Disney World in Orlando. Did you have a favorite ride?
I did not have a favorite ride. I enjoy them all equally, just like my children, but I had a great time and I'm very glad to be back.
Okay. Can I say if you did have a favorite ride, I feel like it would be the Winnie the Pooh ride. That's just my feeling for you. Okay. You don't have to just wink or something if that's true. Don't give it away though. Okay. Winnie the Pooh is my favorite for you. All right. Let's talk about what is on our docket. What are we covering today? And the first thing we're talking about is this deployment of the National Guard and Marines in Los Angeles by the Trump administration. I understand it's calmed down a little bit. They're not rioting and looting so much anymore, but we're going to do a little legal analysis on whether it's legal. Does the president have that type of authority to deploy the National Guard and the Marines to keep order and peace? And then we'll also be talking about selling units of your duplex or fourplex as a condo, how to do that. Can you just do it, or do you have to do anything legal or fancy? And spoiler alert, it is a little bit of a complex process, so you can't decide overnight just to sell a unit of your duplex as a condominium. A little bit of a process on that. And then finally, in our rant and rave section, we'll be talking about guardianship for people with mental health issues and why there are really no good solutions if you have a loved one with a mental health problem and you're trying to get them help, at least in the guardianship arena. So let's go ahead and get it kicked off with our legal news section. And the first thing we are going to discuss is this deployment of the National Guard and Marines by Trump. And Chris, you've heard about this, I presume. I know you're not a big follower of the news, but you've heard about it a little bit.
I have heard of it. I don't know everything that's going on, but obviously things like that make national news.
So what was happening is ICE was going around cities like Los Angeles and Houston and Austin and really all over the country. And they were arresting undocumented people here illegally. And that was upsetting some people, and they decided to protest. I think it started with some peaceful protests in cities like Los Angeles, but like many protests in Los Angeles, I guess things got a little out of control, got a little unorderly. They started defacing federal property. I don't know if they actually assaulted anybody or not, but it certainly did rise to the level of a riot. Trump felt like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles, did not really have that under control. So Trump sent in the National Guard. Now, interestingly, he did not do this through the Insurrection Act. And he did this through the statute in Section 12406 of the Title 10 of the U.S. Code. I did not know about it, but he did it through the statute. And the statute allows the president to call on federal service members. And here I'm going to quote the statute. When there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, or when the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Chris, what do you think? Do you think a little bit of looting and rioting rises to that level? Does that statute give the president the authority to do that just on hearing that quote of the law?
I can see the argument. I'm like any lawyer. I can see it both ways. It does sound like maybe a bit of a broad interpretation. And the only reason that I can think of offhand that it would fall under that is specifically because they're protesting a governmental agency. Therefore, it seems to fall under the language that you just read, that it's against the government. Whereas if it was just general protest against something else, it may not rise to that level. But that's what I'm thinking.
Now, what's interesting about this is if I were just sitting on my sofa and watching him send in the National Guard, I would think, oh, he did it under the Insurrection. And I went and looked that, but he didn't. And I went and looked it up. Insurrection Act of 1807. And it's actually it gives the president broad authority to use the U.S. military to suppress domestic unrest. And I thought, why? I always think when I hear an old law like that, I always think what was going on historically in 1807 when it was passed. And it turns out that we were concerned with there were a lot of labor disputes at the time, some racial unrest, natural disasters. And we wanted to give the president that authority to keep law and order in the country. He did not use the Insurrection Act. Instead, he relied on that one statute, Section 12406, Title 10. So he didn't do the obvious thing. And this is why this is a very novel issue. There is this counter law, and it's called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. I'd never heard of it. Chris, you're nodding your head, so I guess you've heard of it. Not sure if
it's the law that stops us from declaring martial law.
Yeah. So you have this. Chris, I'm continue to be impressed with Baylor Law School every time you do stuff like that. Let's
learn that in high school debate, but that's okay.
Okay. I'm continuing to be impressed with your high school debate team from Wyoming. Okay.
We were good.
I saw Posse Comitatus and I was like, man, that's a pretty cool name. Let's round up a posse. But actually the opposite, restricts the military from using it for domestic law enforcement. Now, Chris, 1878, historically, I don't know if you've got the outline in front of you. You never do.
I don't.
Do you have any idea what was going on just before 1878 that may have prompted that any idea? I'm not expecting you to get this.
Post Civil War, pretty far past Civil War, so I don't know.
Yeah, so we have some listeners that are history buffs, and I'm sure they've got this. Right after the Civil War, we had the Reconstruction period, and during that period, it was really basically martial law. And we're from Texas, and I'm trying not to paint this with a Southern Texas bias, but if you ask older people that are like 80 years old from Texas or the Deep South about Reconstruction, and first of all, if you ask them anything about the Civil War, they're gonna correct you immediately and say, no, it's the War of Northern Aggression. And they talk about the Reconstruction period as basically an occupation where Northern soldiers were basically allowed to run amok and commit all sorts of abuses in the South directly after the Civil War. So that's how we got this Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. I think it was a reaction to no, this had gone too far during Reconstruction. So it's pretty cool that you have these competing forces. You've got this one act that says, no, don't have martial law. And then you've got this one insurrectionist act that says, oh yeah, you can do something like that. So for whatever reason, Trump's attorneys wanted to sidestep all this and use Section 12406 of Title 10. Now, California, no surprise, Gavin Newsom, he filed a lawsuit to stop Trump from using the National Guard. Why? From a policy standpoint, if you're Gavin Newsom, why do you want to stop Trump? Is that political? Or if you say you were the governor of Wyoming and you were having riots, would you welcome the National Guard or no? What do you think?
I think it's a general dislike of anybody interfering with your own sovereignty, and that's what I was thinking when you talked about the different methods of enforcing this. I wonder if it was I'm not even going to use the general power that people usually look to. I'm going to use this that specifically says you don't have control of your state. And so they would see it as an insult and a slap in the face. And so he's naturally going to get a reaction like that. And obviously Trump and Newsom don't get along by any means. There's going to be a lot of headbutting just on principle alone.
Yeah. Greg Abbott, our governor of Texas, he got ahead of it. We were having some problems in Austin. And Greg Abbott, I think he said, no, I've got this. And he deployed the National Guard. I guess governors have that power. So Gavin Newsom did not like it. Chris, you're 100% right. There's a lot of politics with Gavin Newsom and Trump butting heads there. This is a quote from Gavin Newsom. I like to display or put forth the other side for our listeners, so we're not accused of being a conservative Republican show. But so here it is. And this is Gavin Newsom's quote. To put it bluntly, there is no invasion or rebellion in Los Angeles. There is civil unrest that is no different from episodes that regularly occur in communities throughout the country, and that is capable of being contained by state and local authorities working together. And nothing is stopping the president from enforcing the laws through the use of ordinary civilian mechanisms available to federal officers. That's his quotes. Now, I will beat California up a little bit on this. Okay. There's Gavin Newsom is saying we have these riots, and this is very typical of types of unrest and riots that go on in the in the other parts of the country. But Chris, California, especially Los Angeles, does have a history of their riots being a bit excessive. Can you think of any riots off? I have a list. I cheat because I researched the show. Chris is gracious enough to do this with me, but he doesn't really research it. But can you think of any obvious riots in LA that might have got going? There's one I knew of. I didn't know the other. Now there's two actually.
I remember the Rodney King stuff when I was a kid. I remember that.
You've got a good memory. The Rodney King, 1992. The police were acquitted for beating him up. As a kid, I don't exactly know whether it was right or wrong, but he was acquitted. That was a riot. The Watts riots, 1965. I think my parents, they're not from LA, but they've told me a little bit about that. There were riots during George Floyd issue in 2020. And then this one, I don't know if anyone's going to get. You'd have to be quite a bit older. The Zoot Suits riots from 1943. And it was between white servicemen and the Latino youth. I remember learning about that in American history. Did you also learn about that in debate, Chris, in Wyoming?
I did not. It was in a song in the 90s. I know that.
I don't even know what a zoot suit is. We're going to have to throw a photo or something up of what a zoot suit is. But yeah, Gavin, look, the city's kind of known for riots that get out of control. There's a lot going on there. What do you, from a policy standpoint, if you had to take a stand, Chris, and you had to have a dog in the fight, what do you think? Do you like Trump deploying the National Guard or not? The law aside, which is always a dangerous
It's
thing.
probably unnecessary. It's probably something local law enforcement could have handled. It's probably just a flex that Trump wanted to do. And this is politics in America.
I don't like it either. I think I like it for a slightly different reason, or I don't like it for a slightly different reason. I really am a big checks and balances guy. I don't like the president having the authority. I come at it more from a states' right kind of thing. So yes, the federal government want to live in the United States. I'm not a Texas secession guy, but I will tell you, I do want to have states' rights. I don't want the federal government being overly oppressive. So
you got to think about it in terms of what if we have a Democrat president and we have a Republican governor in Texas? What if the Democrat president and the Republican governor are at odds? What apply it both ways? And you have to, would I want this if I didn't agree with the president? I do agree with the president. It has to be uniformly.
Yeah, I don't. So there you go. I don't like it. That's my sort of a two cents on it. But yeah, we'll see how it comes out. Gavin Newsom, that lawsuit that they did file in San Francisco, I'm assuming it was in a federal district court. No surprise.
But they won.
They won. But then it went up to an appellate court. This was just yesterday, maybe this morning, went up to an appellate court for a hearing here pretty soon. So Trump,
they're going to win at the Ninth Circuit too.
Yeah, no surprise. And we'll see if the Supreme Court takes it up. So keep everyone updated on that. All right, that brings us to our legal question section. This was actually from in our Google Space chat room for our attorneys. One of our attorneys was asking this again. So we've got someone owning a fourplex and they want to replat. And this is parentheses, for lack of a better word, close parentheses. That's actually the right word, but they don't want to replat. And they want to sell the units individually. Do they need to set up a condominium regime, or can they just do it? Chris, one of our favorite, I can't mention his name, but it was one of our favorite clients from years ago, who was a problem client, frankly. I know he's a listener of this, actually. So now he likes to listen. He comments on our social media. So, all right. Anyway, nonetheless, if you are listening, you were a problem client. So he called up 3 weeks ago and had this question, and he was downright not gonna say yelling at me, but he was very confrontational about whether that he just had this fourplex or sixplex, and he did not need to do a condominium. Chris, what do you think?
I think you probably do. And I think that's funny because it's like you're an accountant. You think if you're a good accountant, you can make me pay no taxes. If you're a good attorney, you can get away with everything. You can make me not have to do everything, which would be great if we could save our clients time and money. But unfortunately, sometimes we just got to follow the rules and we got to do it the right way.
Yeah, he didn't want to do. People don't want to do it because they just don't want to pay the money.
And they assume you're a bad lawyer if you can't find a way for them not to do it.
Yeah. In theory, you could just make up a legal description out of thin air and sell, and I could do a deed over to you, Chris, of the duplex. And it would actually, from a contractual standpoint, it would pay if it met the qualifications of a deed, it would actually pass title. But there would be other problems.
I think what people miss is we could do that. We could use our legal brain. We could get creative and we could find a way to do it. But what happens when that person goes to sell? Or what happens when the city finds out and they shut off your utilities? Then what happens?
Yeah, there's a whole host of problems with it. How's the appraisal district going to tax it? You've got no regime in place for maintaining common areas, and you're probably in violation of zoning laws.
Who's going to fix the roof? When the roof needs to be repaired, all four of you got to sit down, and who's going to fix the roof?
Yeah. So to do it the right way, you are going to need to do a replat. You're going to hire a survey company to go out and do that. You're going to get actual legal descriptions. Here's a sample legal description of a condominium. You'll have something like Unit 102 of the common interest land and elements of the greatest building ever, North Condo, Second Amendment. You'll have something like that. Your surveyor can give that to you, but you really do need to go through the replat process. And then once you have that done, then you come to us as the real estate attorney or other real estate attorney, and we need to do the condo documents. You have to have a condominium declaration. There has to be generally restrictive covenants. We might even form an HOA corporation so that there's some sort of management in place. So that's how you do that. All right, that brings us to final section of the show. Always my favorite section of the show, rant and rave. This one's guardianships for people with mental health issues. Chris, do you remember when the firm first started? We were not very old. Our firm's about 11 years old, I think. And we somehow got into a mental health docket case. Do you remember that at all? Okay. We don't want to bore the listeners too much, but we thought it was a guardianship, and then somehow you ended up down in a mental health court in front of a magistrate, and somebody looked at you and said, I didn't know you did this. And you were like, I didn't know either.
It's the same. The probate judges do the mental health docket. And so there is a big overlap, but it's a very specialized area. And the people who do the mental health docket are very specialized and they know how the mental health docket runs. And I'm certainly familiar with it, but I'm not one of the attorneys that handles the mental health docket. Those attorneys get, I think, dozens, if not hundreds of clients that they have to see on a rotating basis because we're a big county and anybody who's picked up on a mental health warrant has to get representation if they want it. So it's a lot and it's a whole other world and it's not your standard guardianship situation.
Yeah. Let me set the stage here a little bit. So usually what happens is, Chris, we get concerned the mother call us up and say, hey, my adult daughter is bipolar. She's not on her meds. And she's out there living under a bridge. Go get me an emergency guardianship. And Chris, what's your response to that?
That they have to call somebody who specializes in the mental health, just like we talked about, because our specialties is just not carry us through that realm. We have not been successful in getting it, contrary to what I was just talking about. And if the attorney can't get it, they must be a bad attorney. I do respect some of the more specialized attorneys that really deal with those mental health cases because they are so challenging. They're very challenging because it's not the same as a minor with Down syndrome turning 18 or 90-year-old mom who clearly has dementia. These are people who do not have capacity, will not regain capacity, absolutely need a guardian to take care of that. Mental health cases are so much more challenging than that.
So what's the response that you've gotten? Let's say mom was like, no, I want you to handle it from a guardianship case. And you go to the probate judge and say, hey, judge, give me an emergency guardianship. What's the response we've been getting from those judges or from the court?
That unfortunately it just doesn't rise to that standard because at the level of incapacity, and once the issue is also that once they get on their meds, they're fine. And so then they seek to have the guardianship dissolved. And so then we go through this roundabout where it's they get off their meds, they need a guardian, they get on their meds, they don't need a guardian. So again, this is probably the biggest one, but just one of the challenging aspects of dealing with mental health cases.
Yeah. They are extremely challenging. I feel like we need to do a public service. Let me just, if you do have someone out there that's suffering from a mental health issue and you're saying, okay, and this is the rant about it, or the frustrating thing is we can't get guardianship help. And maybe that's the right result, but we can't get a guardianship. So what do we do? And you have to swear out a mental health warrant. So any adult can do that. And they call it, it's also known as a mental illness warrant. And what happens is you testify to that effect. They have a hearing to make sure there's a probability, reasonable cause, if you will, or likelihood for this person to harm themselves or harm other people. And then once they have that kind of emergency hearing, they'll send a peace officer to go pick up the person, take them to a mental health facility where they will be evaluated. And by law, if they have to get a more permanent hearing within 72 hours, usually what happens is once they do the evaluation, they figure out, oh, this person's been diagnosed as this disorder, they'll give the person the right medication, and then the person returns to normal, and then they release them. That's normally what happens. And then the problem repeats. And so it's a broken system. And I don't know if it's something that a legal system is really is best equipped to handle. I feel like parents and people who have loved ones suffering from mental illness are often calling us saying, hey, you're a lawyer, solve this problem. Not every problem can be solved by a lawyer. And that's an example of one of those problems that you really need several disciplines to try to tackle this complex issue. Maybe you do need a lawyer that specializes in mental health to at least get them in a facility and then figure out you're going to need some type of doctor to get them some permanent solutions and some rehabilitation. So it is a frustrating thing for both our firm when we're dealing with this and the parents that are often just trying to help. All right, that brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silberman. Chris has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcast. And as a reminder, nothing in this show is to be considered legal advice, and this has all been for entertainment purposes only. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com. Tell us you want it publicly answered in the podcast. All right, everybody, have a great weekend.
Adios.